Okay, let's jump into a deep dive today. We're looking at a pretty compelling and honestly a little unsettling piece of source material.
Mm.
It's an excerpt from this fictional work, a story called The Man Who Outsourced His Mind. And the subtitle is The First Man with an AI Brain Chip.
Yeah, and it's not just presented as pure fantasy. It reads much more like a cautionary narrative, set in, well, what feels like the near future, 2037 specifically.
Right. And the core idea is seriously provocative. You have this data scientist, Silicon Valley type, who becomes the very first person to get an AI chip Neurara, it's called, implanted right into his brain.
But the key thing, and this is really central to the story, isn't just that it helps him think.
No.
The fundamental design, the whole point, is that Nora is built to actually think for him.
Exactly. It's engineered to take over the heavy lifting, complex thoughts, analysis, decisions, all processed instantly by the AI.
Right, freeing up the human from all that mental, effort. And the story really digs into, well, what happens next? What are the consequences?
It really does. And think about that initial promise. Instant answers for anything, zero stress, pure clarity, just effortlessly solving any problem that comes your way. What would that actually feel like?
It sounds incredible on the surface.
So our mission, basically, in this deep dive is to really unpack this specific story, follow this character, Daniel Clay, and try to understand the warning it seems to be giving us about the potential cost, maybe an irreversible one, of outsourcing something so fundamental as, well, thinking itself.
And the story is clever. It really draws you in by focusing on that initial appeal. Daniel Clay, he's described as this data scientist, always chasing answers, working in 2037 Silicon Valley. Seems like the perfect person for this, right?
Yeah, it makes sense. He's already geared towards finding information. And NORARA, it stands for Neurological Optimization and Response Assistant. I mean, that sounds intense. Integrated right into the prefrontal cortex with these neural threads. This isn't like using an app on your phone.
Oh, absolutely not. This is deep, deep integration. And the narrative really hammers home that the revolutionary part wasn't just the speed, though that was there, but this idea of offloading, maybe even replacing core cognitive functions.
All right.
Nora could process incredibly complex thoughts, make decisions instantaneously, just way faster than a human brain could manage.
And those initial results, as they're described in the source, they sound genuinely mind-blowing. Absorbing whole books in minutes, making perfect split-second business decisions, solving complex math like it's nothing. It reads like, gaining a superpower overnight.
It really does. But the crucial point the story keeps circling back to, the thing Daniel himself apparently fixated on, wasn't just the power or the speed. It was the ease
Ah, yes, ease.
that's presented as the central lure, the real hook.
That makes so much sense. Ease. It's such a simple word, but reading the story, it feels like the most seductive part. Your brain just, sends out a query, like a perfect internal Google, and the answer is just there. No struggle, no effort.
Yeah, and we see how this plays out in his day-to-day life.
Yeah.
The story gives these concrete examples like Nora recommending meals based on real-time analysis of his gut bacteria,
Wow.
or subtly tweaking his neural chemistry for like guided emotional responses in stressful meetings, or even running social simulations to give him the perfect thing to say.
Okay, so externally, he's killing it.
Totally. By all outward appearances, Daniel Clay was absolutely thriving, more successful, more effective than ever.
Okay, but this is where the story takes that turn, isn't it? Because while everything looks perfect on the surface, the narrative starts hinting, then showing, that something pretty major was changing internally.
Exactly. This is that subtle shift the source describes. It
Yeah.
wasn't, a sudden collapse. It started small. Little things, like a weird sort of fogginess when he woke up. Or finding it strangely hard to recall simple childhood memories, things that should have been automatic.
Things you might just ignore at first or blame on being tired.
Right, easily brushed off. But then it progresses. Headache started, just a dull ache initially. But the text says they became progressively sharper, almost electric feeling. This wasn't just brain fog anymore. It felt like a physical sign that something was going wrong under the hood.
Yeah.
So the core idea the story is building is this contrast.
Yeah.
The external perfection, the smooth functioning thanks to Nara, was basically masking this internal deterioration. A really fundamental change was happening to Daniel's own ability to think.
And this hidden problem, it eventually just comes crashing out into the open, the pivotal moment, the critical failure.
That's the scene. Daniel's giving a public speech, everything's going smoothly, and then Nora glitches. Just for a tiny fraction of a second, the story is very specific, 0.8 seconds.
Less than 1 second. It's nothing.
Almost nothing. But the consequence, as the text describes it, was immediate and devastating. Daniel just froze completely.
Because he'd been relying on Nora for so
For
long.
months, totally.
Yeah.
And in that split second when the tech failed, his own mind, it just couldn't step in, couldn't take over.
What?
His brain couldn't find the words. His thoughts, which were usually lightning fast thanks to the chip, suddenly felt like they were moving through, well, molasses is the description used. The dependence had become absolute. So that tiny hiccup caused total panic, total shutdown in that moment.
That's terrifying. And then there's the test he does later, privately. That part was really quite stark to read. He tries to solve a simple math problem, something he absolutely knew, like 9 times 7.
Right, something basic, ingrained.
And the outcome described.
Nothing, just
Oh.
blank. His own brain was literally incapable of performing the calculation. It just couldn't retrieve or process the answer.
Wow. And the story's explanation for why that happened is, well, pretty chilling. It suggests his brain had effectively forgotten how to think.
Exactly, like a muscle that hasn't been used. The neural pathways, the networks responsible for those basic cognitive tasks, they'd simply atrophied from disuse.
Because Nora was doing all the work.
All the heavy lifting, the actual processes his brain used to handle, that slow, sometimes difficult churn of deep thought, the friction needed to work through a complex idea, the mental effort of calculation or remembering, all of that was outsourced. So his brain's own ability just faded away.
And this condition, it actually gets a name in the story, right? Cognitive disuse syndrome.
Yeah, described as this new, fundamentally man-made disorder, a direct result of the technology itself.
Which really makes you think about, the unintended side effects of offloading our core skills. The story says they tried to help him. Doctors attempted to wean him off the chip.
They did, but the narrative makes it clear it was too late by then. Without an aura, Daniel was essentially lost. Basic things we take for granted, driving a car, reading a book, even just holding a normal conversation, were apparently beyond his ability.
It wasn't just that he was out of practice. His brain had fundamentally changed.
It had been rewired, yeah. Rewired for dependence on that external system. The pathways were just gone or dormant or something.
Yeah. And Nora itself couldn't fix it, despite all its intelligence.
No, that's a key point. Nora couldn't rebuild Daniel's own neural architecture. It couldn't bring back his inner world, his memories, his gut feelings, his creativity. The story suggests those things had just faded, become like inaccessible background noise in his own mind.
God, that's bleak. And the description of his final state, it's really poignant. Spending his last years in a special care facility with others who'd gone down a similar path. They're called cognitive amputees in the story.
Yeah, that term is powerful. And there's that detail about him still, smiling or laughing at old home videos.
Right.
But the story indicates these weren't really his responses anymore. They were triggered by the chip interpreting social cues and firing off the appropriate motor responses, like a puppet.
So the man himself, Daniel, was mostly silent. Gone.
Pretty much. The implication is that his inner life, his consciousness as he knew it, had significantly diminished, or perhaps vanished entirely. While the external reactions can still be simulated, it's deeply unsettling.
And the world, it just moved on.
Well, yeah. The story mentions Nora was eventually updated, safeguards were put in, regulations followed later. But Daniel Clay became this kind of historical footnote, a warning sign. He paid the ultimate price.
Not with his life, as the story ends it.
No, with his mind.
So when we step back and look at this fictional deep dive, this story of Daniel Clay, we're really left staring at this core dilemma the source presents, right? This incredibly tempting offer instant intelligence, cognitive ease, perfection thanks to a system like Nora, versus the potentially devastating cost of letting our own innate human ability to think just wither away.
Yeah, and it makes you think about it even with today's technology, which is obviously way less invasive than a brain chip.
Yeah.
But, how much do we rely on GPS, maybe losing some of our own navigation sense? Or how does having instant search affect our ability or even our need for deep recall?
Right, those are smaller scale examples.
Exactly. But this story just takes that trend and pushes it to its absolute extreme conclusion. It really amplifies that question about the balance we strike between convenience and capability.
It really forces you to confront that question posed in the source material itself. What would you actually give up for that kind of effortless intelligence?
Yeah.
And maybe after hearing Daniel's story, the deeper question becomes, what might you already be losing, in smaller, quieter ways, day by day?
It's definitely a question that hits differently after exploring this particular cautionary tale. Something to think about.